Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming Cathy McDermott.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. Thank you to Connell and the team, and I would like to pay my respects to the custodians of this land. Today I'm going to share about what we've been doing in Australia with the Property Council of Australia around our work around gender diversity, and it's a journey that has taken 4 years today. It's been a journey of sharing lessons, resources, and a lot of honesty across organisations. I do want to acknowledge first up that you certainly outrank Australia in rugby, instability of prime ministers, and on pay equity and cultural diversity. So it's with great respect that I'm here today to talk about our gender diversity initiatives with the hope that we're going to collaborate together on this important issue. And in fact, on Tuesday I had the great honour and pleasure of working with your inaugural National Diversity Committee of the Property Council. We spent 2 hours workshopping what are going to be the priorities of that committee in the next 1 to 2 years. And each member of that expert committee started by having focus groups in their organisations and asking their people, men and women, what are the challenges and barriers in their industry and in their organisations that may be holding them back from thriving. And it's from those results that the action plan is going to be built. And that's certainly a principle that we always have been using at the Property Council over in Australia, is that any time we start an initiative, we always want to go back and talk to people in our organisations and find out what is the lived experience rather than the policies that we think we have in place. So I wanted to start by just stating that the diversity dividend is a financial reality. This is an excellent report that Westpac released last year, at the end of last year, done by Deloitte's Access Economics. And it really demonstrates, I really urge you to read it, it demonstrates that when there will be equal representation by gender in leadership, it could have an 881 million positive impact on your economy. A mega study of close to 22,000 organisations across 91 countries 2 years ago showed that businesses that have at least 30% female leadership will outperform their competitors by 15%. And when you think about it, in the property industry, we create enduring communities for generations. How can we not tap into the influence and insights of 51% of our population when we're building these? The Property Council of Australia see it as our role to bring together our members on this work around gender. We have been focused, when we talk about diversity, we have started with gender diversity, but we acknowledge the raft of issues if we are truly to build a diverse and inclusive industry. We picked gender because it is 51% of our population, and women in our industry in Australia were underrepresented, particularly in leadership roles. Like all our advocacy work at the Property Council, we started this in 2014 with a baseline of research, and we asked EY to go and talk to leaders in 15 of our big companies, 15 big companies, and it was 19 leaders, 12 men and 7 women. And we wanted to find out where they were in their diversity knowledge and their diversity journey, and the results were really alarming. So it really got us to a call to action. So on this curve, it showed that a lot of our industry leaders had policies, they were doing compliance, but when it came to true leadership and true understanding of the gender diversity issues, it was lacking. And a particularly alarming fact that most of the executives interviewed said that they understood the business case for diversity, but it wasn't affecting our industry just yet. So it showed that we had a very divided response in our industry, and we needed disruptive actions. We needed to disrupt the status quo. This research came out just at a point where we were looking to form the Property Male Champions of Change. And it really verified that we needed urgent and disruptive action. Now, the Property Male Champions of Change has been an absolute game changer for us in our industry. Our group is convened by Carol Schwartz, a leading businesswoman in Australia. She's on a number of boards as a non-executive director, including the Reserve Bank of Australia. And she was also our first woman national president of the Property Council of Australia. So the Male Champions of Change community started in Australia in 2010 by the then Human Rights Sex Discrimination Commissioner Liz Broderick, and many of you would have had the opportunity to hear Liz speak about her work. She started it with 8 Australian CEOs, including the CEOs of Qantas and the head of Army, and her philosophy was women were doing the heavy lifting when it came to gender diversity change, and it was time that the men stepped up beside them to work side by side. Liz is a global leader in this type of work, and last year she was appointed by the UN to represent women in the developed countries. She says, in most nations, men largely occupy the seats of power. Relying exclusively on women to lead change on gender equality is therefore illogical, and we need decent, powerful men to step up beside women to create a more gender equal world. And we know in property, there are an abundance of decent, powerful men. The Male Champions of Change community in Australia has grown to 10 groups, 180 CEOs, and they represent 6% of the Australian workforce. So now when we come together and initiate change, it's quite a force that can happen quite quickly and influence tens of thousands of workers. I've been very interested to learn more about the Global Women Group and their work in New Zealand, and Leonie, who's on our panel, is very much part of that, and also their Champions of Change work, which really shares the aspirations and the action orientation of the Male Champions of Change. And Jason, who's on our panel, is a very active champion of change in that group. As I said, forming the Property Male Champions of Change for us was a game changer, because when you have 21 CEOs saying, yes, we're going to decide to make this change, I'm going to implement it in my organisation, I'm going to speak about it publicly at every opportunity, I'm going to include it in my investor presentations, change really accelerates. We meet 4 times a year. These are the organisations in the group, and we meet for 2 hours, and as it is the leadership strategy, the no delegations are accepted, the champions have to attend in person. Throughout the year, they work in their subgroups, as we call action groups, on a variety of projects that have been identified as priorities for the next 2 years. The things we're focusing on right now, we're just in our 2nd strategy, mainstreaming flexibility, growing our talent pool, and closing the gender pay gap. As part of our work was focused on growing the talent pool because we wanted to include women's representation at all parts of their careers and across our industry. Again, we started with research. And we surveyed 3,800 people, men and women, across 18 of the organisations in the Property Male Champions of Change. And we asked them, what are the barriers and challenges to coming into property and then succeeding in property? Our research told us that men and women have identical leadership aspirations. But when women look at the reality before them at this time, they looked at the number of women on boards, the number of women of CEOs of property companies, they did not believe this aspiration would translate into a reality. This is not a personal confidence issue. It was about the visible number of women who were leaders in our industry at that point of time. The biggest deterrent in our industry, no surprises, number 1 was the boys' club mentality. I do want to draw your attention to 35% of men identified that as a deterrent for them as well. Property is really good at identifying change and then agreeing to get moving and solve problems together. And you only have to think about what we've been able to achieve on sustainability and safety in Australia and New Zealand, global leaders, and we can do exactly the same when we put our mind to gender diversity. We knew our role as the Property Council of Australia was to bring our members together and help them to do the work that they were doing, they wanted to do, they were doing in their organisation, sometimes in bits and pieces, but by uniting together we could really get some momentum and we could share resources. And that's really important because some of the smaller members do not have big people and culture teams, and we wanted them to have access to the knowledge and policies that some of our other bigger members had. John mentioned in his opening speech about our commitment and how championing diversity is part of the Property Council strategy. We put it in our strategy in 2015, and that was called Championing Diversity. It was a pillar of work. And in our latest strategy, we've expanded it championing diversity and inclusiveness to signal that we are moving into other forms of diversity next year, and we'll look at cultural after gender. Now, you have to put it in your strategy at the Property Council because you need investment and you need resources and you need to staff it. So at the Property Council of Australia at the moment, we conservatively spend $300,000 every year on these initiatives, and that's mainly external contractors and research. We have volunteer diversity committees in all our states and territories, and these are an army of women and men who help us with all our initiatives, and they're just so motivated and so driven. You have this in your newly formed National Diversity Committee, and I'm sure it will grow and grow across your organisation. So what have we been able to do? I might just go back to that one. In the past 2 years, 100% of the Property Mail Champions of Change organisations have conducted or are currently conducting a pay equity review. And this is just so vital if we're going to close the gender pay gap. 95% of our organisations, women made up 40 or more of appointments, and that was up from 89% in 2016-2017. In 75% of our PMCC organisations, women promotions were either proportional or greater than their representation in the workforce. And 95% of our organisations have an organisation-wide approach to enabling flexibility in work. Importantly, 60% provide superannuation on paid and unpaid parental leave, and 100% of them are committed to improving flexible work and conditions for carers, enabling carers to be workers. What we keep front and centre in all this work is the personal commitment of everyone involved, the leadership, and looking for opportunities where we can really embed diversity and inclusiveness throughout the industry. We work really closely with our diversity committees, as you do with your Property Council committees. They really inform our priorities and what's happening on the ground. We also work with Chief Executive Women, which is similar to Global Women, and we work with our divisions to make sure that we're truly making this impact across the country, and it's a national movement. We know profiling our women leaders is very important and discussing diversity issues, and we built a series of events around the countries which are incredibly well supported. And this is similar to your Women in Property series that you have in New Zealand. I would encourage you to continue it and to really tackle the big issues. And in Australia, we focused on changing the makeup of the audience. Typically, these events used to be really well supported by women, and we want diversity in our audiences at all our events, and we want men and women discussing diversity issues at these ones. We also recognise that mentoring is very important, but so is that informal championing that you see in your organisations, the sponsorship of women. And recognising this, we started in 2016 one of our most impactful initiatives across our organisation. So we said to our leaders, men and women, identify a young woman in your organisation or your network that you would like to champion and really support, kickstart their career. And we started with it was firstly called 100 Women in Property, and it's grown to 500 women, which is sort of a spoiler to tell you how successful it is. So we kept it really simple, and the simplicity is the key to it, and I urge you to do this in any of your initiatives. We said to the sponsors, what we want you to do is to meet with your participant and help them do their professional development plan for the year. We want you to help them to get ready for their performance review. We want you to bring them to 2 Property Council events and actively model and coach them on how to network and how to follow up with the people that they met. We've built on the program, and we've done additional briefings for the participants so they can build their cohort of peers that they will really work their career with together. So as I said, in 2016, our ambition was to have 100 participants, 100 sponsors. And we weren't very confident that we were going to get it because it was a new idea. But we thought, let's put it in the title and be aspirational. In our first year, we had 260 participants around the country, 260 sponsors. So in 2017, I thought, maybe we've had a pull-through effect. Maybe we'll just get close to 100 for the second year. The second year, we had 500 participants and 500 sponsors. And we've had to cap it at that because we're growing the program and we want to keep it as a free program, because it's important to keep these programs accessible to the young women who have to go and seek sign-off often to do any sort of training. So it's a really exciting program because at any point of time, we have 1,000 of our members working on diversity initiatives. We also recognised that we had to sell the idea of what was available in property as a career earlier in women's lifetimes. So we started looking at becoming more involved in the schools. Because typically in Australia, property isn't promoted at career days in schools. And when we asked students, what did they think a job in property meant, they answered residential real estate agents and architects. But beyond that, they didn't really have any line of sight. So in 2017, we started a program that we call Girls in Property, and we piloted in New South Wales. It involved 120 girls over 4 schools, and we worked closely with the Education Department. And we brought the girls on site. They went to Barangaroo and they went to the Centre Group's retail project in Pitt Street. So projects that they knew really well as customers and users and had really enjoyed it. And then they learnt the behind the scenes stories about how they were developed, how they operate, and the myriad of jobs that were going to those projects. They also did work with our members, projects on real life projects, and they came up with marketing schemes and feasibilities. They made apps, they've built CAD models. It's quite extraordinary. There's been a marked improvement in their awareness of jobs in property. We benchmark it, we do formal research. And the schools reported that there was an uptake in STEM electives by those girls following that experience. It was so successful that we're now rolling it across the country this year. A week ago, we had it in Brisbane and Adelaide. We ran them concurrently, and they're just absolutely fantastic. They're different in every division and every city to really relate to the local markets and the work that's going on in those cities. Next up is Perth, and then we go to Melbourne, and we finish in Canberra at the end of the year. Our 40-40-20 campaign really highlights the importance of language and setting targets. So at the Property Council of Australia, we have 1,600 volunteer committee roles. These are really highly sought after because people want to make a contribution back to the industry. It's exactly the same here with your committee roles. Want to make a contribution, but at the same time, it gives people an opportunity to build their knowledge and their networks. So in 2014, when we were just starting the journey, we just saw the problem and we thought, well, we've got to get more women on our committees. And that's pretty much how we expressed it. We set a target of 30%. But we didn't invest in that campaign. We just set a target and thought we might get there. And of course, we didn't get there. We landed at 25%. So at our next election in 2016, we ran a campaign like we would run an advocacy campaign. 40-40-20. 40% men, 40% women, and 20% discretionary across all our committees. We built one portal on our website, and we held one time frame for our elections. Before that, we had elections for our committees at all different times around the country. And we said to our members, nominate people in your companies in one nomination and reflect 40-40-20 in your nominations. And this was a huge change in how we approached it, and we achieved structural change when we achieved 43% representation of women on our committee roles. We're in the process of doing our next election. Our nominations open on Monday. Our members understand what we're achieving with 40-40-20. They were so proud that we got there last time, and we're following the same methodology. The Property Council in Australia and the Property Council in New Zealand run a lot of events because networking and sharing information is so important to all our members, and we love doing it. In Australia, we run 350 events a year. So we knew we could play a huge role in showcasing the expertise of our women leaders across the industry. We took the panel pledge, which is a formal pledge to say we would only run and participate in panels where there was diversity of gender representation on the stage. In 2015, we said to all our executives, when you're running your events in your divisions, this is the rule. At first, we had a lot of cop-outs. I asked a woman, she said, no, I can't find a woman, it's tokenism. But then we said, as an executive, no, what is our true commitment? And we linked it to our KPIs, formal KPIs, linked to our incentives. And we took a zero excuses mentality. And at that point, we absolutely changed what our panels look like and what our programs look like. So at our Congress last year, 40% of speakers were women, covering 45% of the program. When you are showcasing the expertise of your women alongside with the expertise of your men, you will attract more women attendees. We track our speakers and attendees at every event across the country in real time on a dashboard, and I report these at every executive and board meeting. So accountability, transparency, very key to tracking how we're going. We've just finished the second survey, our pulse survey, that built on that first one of the 3,800 respondents. This time we got 2,600 across 18 organisations. You'll see in this chart we've made good progress in breaking down the barriers around flexibility and caring, and a big uplift in men saying that closing the gender pay gap is a priority for them. So today I would like to leave you with two learnings about what we've really experienced. Leadership is key. Involving your CEOs and then feeding down through the leadership teams is the fastest way to get information. Be open about sharing. Diversity is a bigger issue than any one organisation, and we can achieve so much when we come together. And use targets with teeth. Gender diversity is like any other business initiative, so you need to set your targets, you need to measure them, and you need to report on them. And my last word goes to Liz Broderick. Gender equality is not a battle of the sexes, it's a battle for equality. A battle that men and women must wage side by side. Think big, think creatively, and rewrite the rules. Thank you for the opportunity today. We're in Australia, we want to share everything we can with the Property Council of New Zealand and all of you here. We've made lots of mistakes, so we would like to spare you them. So anything you've seen today or any of our programs, we're just very, very happy to be handing them to you and helping you with your experience, but it will be very, very much a local experience for you as well. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. It's a fantastic video clip just to segue from Kathy's presentation, and what we've got here is a great panel. So my name's Ryan Johnson. I'm the facilitator, and I'm the National Director of Commercial in New Zealand, and so the co-chair of the newly formed Property Council New Zealand Diversity Committee. So great to be here, great to be talking about this issue, and also having spent the last 3 years in Sydney, I'd just like to congratulate Kathy and the Property Council of Australia. I saw the momentum that Kathy and the team created from 2014 up to 2017, and it's phenomenal. And you know, we've beaten the Aussies in rugby and a few other things, but this one, take your hat off. You guys are heads and shoulders away from us. So
I think you'll catch up quickly.
Yeah.
We'd be happy on this one.
We intend to. So look, it's a very real issue, and hence why John Dakin has put it at the forefront of the Property Council of New Zealand. And I can tell you that, much like our Australian cousins, it's real in New Zealand as well. Bayleys has just commissioned Dr. Deborah Levy of Auckland University to commission a paper on women in commercial property. And Dr. Levy's finished that paper, and I've read it, and I can tell you now that in this room and in our industry, there are some really concerning and alarming issues that we face. And so we here as a group of leaders and influencers in our industry really need to acknowledge it and talk about it. And I think that's the point, and it's fantastic what John's done in terms of putting it at the forefront of the Property Council. So without any further ado, we have three fantastic panellists here to start the conversation around diversity and inclusion. And I'm not going to pick on anyone, or I will actually. Leonie, you're going to be first.
Thanks.
And look, you've got your bios for all our speakers, and they're wonderful backgrounds in terms of in property and staff engagement, recruitment, and Kathy as well. So these panellists are well informed to give you their thoughts on diversity and inclusion. So the first one to Leonie, actually. Diversity and inclusion is now being put as a major strategic objective in the Property Council, but we're already getting pushback from our members. And if I could just ask you about what your thoughts and what you would say to our members about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the property sector.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, and congratulations, Kathy. I thought it was a fantastic presentation, and I think it gives all of us in New Zealand something to aspire to in terms of this issue. Somebody said to me recently that diversity is like being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And so diversity and inclusion to me means for our businesses and our organisations that we have opportunities for everybody to be a part, to contribute, to flourish, regardless of what their backgrounds are, gender, ethnicity, and all of those other things mentioned above. Because we know that we need everybody together, working together to look at innovative and solutions for some of our big problems. And I think it's absolutely critical, not only just for the social justice reasons, but the second one to me is that when you get diversity of backgrounds, diversity of genders, ethnicities and things like that, it creates diversity of thought. And that's one of the key things that we need to make sure that we have in our industry, because we all know the pace of change is ever increasing. We are threatened by disruption. We've got some big challenges in our businesses and in our organisations to solve. And to solve them, we need the best brains and the best innovative ideas to actually come to the table and go forward. So we need to find ways to get all those. And I look at the moment, I used to teach a paper up at Auckland University once a year as my contribution to the industry. And we have 50% female students, 50% male, but so many of them are not following into property. So we're losing out a huge number of really talented young professionals, and they're not coming through. And I think the final key area that's important, and this is important for every business, comes back to financials. And you've only got to read the latest McKinsey report, which surveyed and worked with over 1,000 global companies over more than 12 countries, who identified that where they've got ethnic and gender diversity at management levels, that they are outperforming their competitors by more than 20 to 35% on financial bases. So there's a lot of reasons for it, not just social justice, but we want diversity of thought and to improve the financial status of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point, if at the beginning of your organisations, in terms of your financial year, if you could say categorically that you're going to outperform your peers by 25% and increase your product profitability by 2.2%, I know every person in this room, including me, I'd raise my hand and say, yep, I'd take it. So there's a distinct diversity dividend there, even alongside the moral and social issue. Just, Leonie, just picking up on another part you mentioned there around recruitment, and this is really to Jason as well, in terms of 25 years in recruitment, the property industry attracting the best and brightest. Are we, or where are they going? What do you see?
Well, I think the biggest challenges that are going to face not just the property industry, but any industry which really hasn't got a lot of inclusiveness as part of their policies, is that there's a new generation coming through, and their expectation is that you are going to have anti-discrimination and diverse policies in place in the workforce. So if you don't take the choice to change, it's going to be forced upon you anyway, because you will very quickly become a very unattractive employer in the marketplace. And today already, when you look at the unemployment rates, 4.9%, so that's nearly 5 people out of every 100 is unemployed. But then when you look at other statistics, nearly 5% of those in the workforce are underemployed. That means there's about 130,000 individuals who are underemployed. More than 2/3 of those, actually 3/4 of those, are females. So 77,000, that's more than 3 times the number of men that are underemployed. So there's a massive talent pool out there that is getting underutilised currently by not just property employers in New Zealand, but generally employers right across the board. One of the challenges, as part of the Champions for Change, we look at these initiatives and we have some great debates. There's 50 CEOs, top CEOs, sitting around tables, really debating. There's a lot of confrontation about What are some of the challenges? What are some of the initiatives that we can do to drive improving gender, ethnicity within organisations? Public sector does this extremely well. Also, a lot of the iwi organisations do it well. And one of the main reasons is because they're not reporting on an annual basis to shareholders, stakeholders, and they're really, and although there's a dividend that can be generated through greater inclusiveness and diversity, that dividend isn't recognised on a balance sheet by your shareholders and stakeholders. What's recognised is profitability and revenue generation. And so often what an excuse will be not to be more diverse, not to be more inclusive, will be, look, we have we have an unconscious bias within our organisation. Well, I actually challenge them and say a lot of the bias is a conscious bias, where you actively look at what you're going to achieve on the bottom line and you make a decision which is more technically and more skilled based, and it tends to be on a white male who can come in and take one of these roles, as opposed to amount of time and investment that you need to put in perhaps in taking somebody of a different ethnicity, somebody who might have special needs or abilities, or people from different gender categories, or those types of things. So I think organisations need to look at their leaderships. Leaders cast a massive shadow. If you want to get an insight into how your business is doing from an exclusiveness standpoint, just think about the shadow that your leadership casts across your organisation. Is this a place where your sisters, your daughters, your wives would want to work? I think you've seen that. If it isn't, then that's potentially one of the first things that you need to change. So if you want to attract great talent, if it takes us back to that question, you need to look at what you're doing within your organisation currently to support different genders or different ethnicities within your organisation, what the conversation is that you're having with your brand out into the open market. Is it more masculine than it should be? And start with those things first, because if you become unattractive, your competitors will have a step up on you.
And from your experience in Hayes as a recruiter across New Zealand, how do you view the property sector?
I'll be honest, it's very just look around the room, it's very male dominated. I've gone to property client events. It's very macho, very, I've got to say, fairly chauvinistic. And it's not a place that someone said, it's not a place that I would like my daughter to work. I'm a bloke. I find that atmosphere quite comfortable. I mean, it's a very comfortable atmosphere to be in if you're a male. I don't think it is if you're a female. And that's not just my opinion alone. I mean, that is a general opinion that tends to be out in the market. I mean, if somebody disagrees with me out there, I'll be quite happy to hear it. But that is the general thought process that come through. In the building where we are, there's 3 or 4 different property organisations, and we have had these conversations. The biggest challenge for them is to get executive leadership to drive the initiatives, because if you don't have executive leadership, whatever initiative you put in place will die at the first hurdle.
Absolutely, and I think the studies and the research and everything that's coming through is showing that leadership is the biggest factor of change for diversity and inclusion in our sector. And Kathy, can you just give us a bit of a guidance in terms of in Australia, the male champions of change, which is somewhat of an oxymoron for gender representation, but how that's succeeded and why it's succeeded?
Yeah, thank you. It's succeeded because the 21 people around the table have massive workforces, so they influence a lot of people immediately with any decision. The structure that has been set up initially by the Human Rights Commission is fantastic, that it always starts with the listening. So throughout the year, those CEOs are running focus groups and asking their people, what's happening for you? What's your experience around this? So something we're talking about right now is everyday sexism in the workplace. Yep. So when we brought this into the group, they said, I don't think we have that. I think we're okay, we fixed that. And we said, well, that'd be great, let's ask your people. Yeah. And then we did 11 focus groups in that small group. And that really was an eye-opener, not just what was happening in their organisation, but when their people were going out and working with their customers and their tenants and their suppliers. So sometimes you can have it quite sorted in your organisation, but when your women are going externally, they're getting a different experience. So always going back to the listening, because CEOs have policies in place, they're not hearing the stories from the floor.
Yeah, and in that report by Dr. Deborah Levy, we saw that through and through, from graduates to women in the industry to women that had left the industry around that sexist behaviour. I'm going to be a little bit off the cuff here and a little bit play it by ear. But for the women in the room, can I ask if you could put your hand up if you've experienced sexist behaviour? Well, for the guys in the room, can you just look around and see that? It's real. So it's in the research, it's in the literature, it's in amongst us, and the only way for it to change, one of the ways for it to change is as leaders and influencers, we need to step up. And so, Kathy, that's a great example in terms of male champions and change. And Jason, you're involved with the CEO Champions and Change too. Is that the same sort of what you're seeing through there?
Yeah, it is. It's, the big difficulty is when you go out and run a lot of these surveys with organisations, because what the Champions for Change have tried to do in New Zealand is to try and create a benchmark. So what is acceptable? And remember, this isn't about perfection, this is about progress. This is looking at a place to start. Now, you might have no policies and processes in place, but there should be no judgment around that, because what you want to do is that move towards making some progress, never matter how small it is within your organisation. I think it was Sir Witter said, you know, if you start with the small things, big things will happen. And that's exactly the same with the diversity process. But, you know, there were CEOs of big organisations who have no idea where to start with this process. Right? There were no resources available out there. So what's the first step that I need to take if I want to go on this journey? And the great thing that we've been able to do, and please go to the Global Women website and the Champions for Change website, is we've outlined now benchmarks, processes, surveys, tools around flexibility, tools around the interviewing process if you want to be more gender neutral. What we wanted to try and do is build a pool of resources, but also some stories about the successes that organisations have had, some of the transitions and the transformations they've gone through, a lot of the mistakes, and actually where most of our learnings happen around that group. And I think this is a great thing that the Property Institute are doing here in New Zealand by starting to focus on gender, is that, you know, you can talk about your problems, you can talk about the issues, and we learn more about the mistakes we made than a lot of the successes that we've achieved. So the best part of it is that we started the conversation, and it was a conversation that a number of the employees and employers were not having. As Kathy said, it's the CEO started to listen a lot more to what their staff were telling them about their organisation, about sexism, about how attractive they were in the business, about the branding and the words they were using, a lot of their marketing. And the best part of it is that we started the conversation, and as soon as you brought that awareness out into the open and into the table, then we all had to make a commitment about doing something about it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we've started that conversation at the Diversity Committee and Ella Brown, getting those tools and resources and policies from Property Council of Australia, to getting those out to organisations. And look, there's some organisations doing some amazing work around diversity and inclusion as well. So we're not all bad at it, some are very good at it, but generally we're not good at it. And so another thought, you know, Leonie, I know when we talked a couple of days ago, you had some thoughts around those entrenched mindsets and how best we can work towards start changing that. Can you just give it a bit of a...
Sure, and I think there's a number of things we can do at different levels. And the first thing I just wanted to comment on is to acknowledge John Dakin for the leadership in the Property Council on this issue, because I think that's a really critical starting point for the sector. And actually, when John was giving his introductory speech this morning and talking about his early days working in Rotorua wearing shorts and long socks, go John, it reminded me that about the same time I started working in Christchurch, I'd finished my property degree at Lincoln, and I was working for Peter Cook at Symes, and I was being trained as a valuer. And I got to meet one of the older valuers in the industry in Christchurch, and at that time I was the first female in private practice in Christchurch. And this older gentleman that I met, who was a valuer, probably in his 70s, smoking a pipe in his office, said to me, "Leonie, I can't understand why Peter Cook took on a female as a valuer in Christchurch." So that was about 30 years ago. So thankfully there has been some progress since then. I can't actually remember what I said to him, but I probably thought, what a plonker. But, you know, it does give you an idea, and it shows that we have come, you know, quite a distance. But if I'm looking at it today, I think there's three key things that we can look at. From a property sector perspective, I think we can look to Australia to what they're doing. So we can look at getting more speakers at conferences, looking at the representation around committees, looking at getting females onto panels, all that sort of thing, so that we actually make a concerted effort. I think at organisational levels, if you're a manager of people, I encourage you to start courageous conversations around this issue in your company. And if you don't know where to start, there is a lot of resources either through the Property Council or through some of these other organisations. But have the courage to start these conversations in your organisations and don't ignore. And then at a third level, I think at a more personal level, what I say to all the women in the room is that when there is an opportunity for you to speak up, to speak at a conference, to get on a panel, to stand for a local committee or a national committee, please do it. And I know exactly what you're all thinking about as I've just said that, because that inner critic in your mind will be telling you, no, 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 you can't do it. So I employ all the women in the room to actually step up and take these opportunities in our property sector. To the men in the room, what I would encourage you to do is go to a woman in property function. You will be welcomed with open arms, but it will be a really interesting insight for you to go to something like that where you are the 5% in the room, not the 95% in the room. And if you're still sitting there thinking, can't see the relevance, not that interested, I then ask you to think about your daughters. And what happens if your daughters want to come into the property sector? Can you see a clear pathway for them and the opportunities for them to follow? Because if you can't, then together we've got to create those and make them a clear opportunity for everybody going forward.
Great, thank you, Leonie. We're starting to run out of time, and I'm going to ask each of the panellists to finish off on. Give me, Kathy, if I can start with you. If we could have a quick win in the next 6 months, what would that look like?
Property Council take the panel pledge, and as many of your members take it as well, because once you have women at every event speaking, it changes the richness of the discussion, and it will change the people attending.
Fantastic. There's one. Right, John, we'll get that one down on the list. Jason, can I get one from you?
Yeah, I think highlight your successes, because one of the great things about when you're starting to do well is really, you want to show everyone else out in the marketplace how you're performing, because it will help your attractiveness. We set up the Hayes Narwick the National Association for Women in Construction Awards 4 or 5 years ago, because we really wanted to highlight the expertise of women in the construction sector, because we found that women weren't putting themselves or proposing themselves for a number of awards within the NZIB awards themselves. Actually, one year they got no nominations for any females, which actually wasn't that unusual. So what we did, we created these awards to really highlight these role models who were doing some incredible things in the market. And what we found, some of these were engineers on Commercial Bay in Auckland who are also running marathons, who are helping third world countries with their with sustainability, who are doing so much more things. They had incredible people with incredible stories to tell. And I think if you can get some of those stories out into the marketplace, you'll increase the attractiveness of your industry. And that's what you want to do, because you'll get in a situation where you will be fighting for talent, not just within your industry, but across other industries. So make yourself more attractive.
Absolutely. Yep. Power pledge, attract talent. Leonie, one quick win.
I know it's really hard when being a property person. I've got about 5 in my head.
You can have 5. You give us 5.
So again, really like the commitment to conferences and the numbers at conferences, speakers, panels. I also suggest the local property council committees and national committees to actually set some targets for some diversity in that area. I'd really like to see that. I'd like us to focus on at the universities and look at encouraging the graduates to come into property so we don't lose them because they're choosing to go into finance or other sectors. And I think that could be another quick win because we've got strong relationships with the universities. And then I'd like us to look slightly wider because at the end of the day, we're all in property. So this is the Property Council, but I suggest we look at how do we put those same panel pledges across other property industry groups, because we're also interlinked and we do so much together, and I think that would have an impact as well. And my last one, because I'm now up to 4, is I encourage every single person in this room during the session to write one thing down that they will go away from today around diversity and inclusion and put in place in their organisation. Because if everyone in this room just did one thing in 6 months, that would multiply exponentially.
Outstanding, and you stole my last one. To finish off, I'd reiterate what Leonie said. If everyone here as influencers, as leaders in the property sector can take away one thing from this conference, that's all we'd need. And the other one is just start the conversation. That's as simple as that. In your organisations, just start it. To start the conversation around diversity and inclusion, and that's all we need for this groundswell to take effect. And if I can just finish, and I picked it up in John when he in his opening remarks. And at the end of the day, when you there's that saying, when you walk past it, you accept it. And John said, whether it was your daughter or a female or a behaviour or sexist behaviour, when you say that's not right, it just isn't. And so don't accept it, don't walk past it, and start the conversation. So if I can ask you to all please show your appreciation to our panellists.
Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a couple of minutes I see on our hand, and I have a question, Jason, for you. It's a tough one. How do you reassure a man that has clawed his way to the top of the sales ladder, has been pushing and shoving his way to get to the top management jobs, that he will be feeling that he has to take a back seat to allow diversity to come through? How do you reassure them? You're in the recruitment industry.
I mean, it's a good question. First of all, they should have strong enough character to reassure themselves and not worry about it. So I'd say that's the first part of it. The second part, look, it's not a competition in terms of picking him over her or a different ethnicity group. It's about what at the top executive level, the executives need to ask. The first question they should ask is, what problem are we trying to solve by bringing in this new executive lead? If you have all white, male, technically skilled individuals on an executive board, but you're not representing your customers or your staff, then that's the first place that you need to start. And then that will actually make you look at the job description in a completely different light, that you're not replacing a John or a Jack. You're actually looking for somebody who's going to be more engaged with your customer base. Just look at Sir Witta Gardner as he presented. If you are looking to get into a Māori enterprise and you have no one who understands tikanga, then you're not going to break in. And so you need to look at that and how you're going to bring somebody else in that can expand that skill set. Now, if you're the top salesperson, the executive at the top of your game, but you do not have that skill set, then you don't deserve that job.
Excellent response. Leonie, my question to you then is this. Are we perhaps as men being sidetracked by the argument or the thought that the pizza is only so big and that there's not enough room at the top for skill to come through? Are we forgetting perhaps our own commercial mindset that says we have to grow the pizza?
Yeah, and I agree, because I think Kathy said it too. This isn't a competition men against women. At the end of the day, I look at our property sector and some of the issues that we face are really large and really complex, and nobody individually can solve them by themselves. And so I keep looking at the stuff that we're all faced with, and we need really smart, innovative thinking. And so to do that, we need to bring lots of different people with different perspectives, because the issues we face are so complex. So to my mind, and even if you look from a straight business perspective, it's not about the pizza, it's about 10 pizzas and growing the pizza so it's much bigger. And I think we can grow the pizza so it's much bigger with a range of different perspectives. Because if we just keep the same people looking at the same thing, it will just always be the same way.
Could I perhaps lead out with the final question to you, Kathy? When we think of immigration, it's an issue for both New Zealand and Australia, and are we perhaps looking at the wrong thing and not looking at the female population that is currently not as engaged in the economy as they should be, and rather we're focused too much on immigration as the solution to our economy?
Well, I think their solution is going to be widespread and across. There's solutions in both part of that. I think women being utilised in full-time jobs, as you alluded to, is a whole lot of circumstances. And what we've got to get right is flex and caring, normalise men taking parental leave across our organisations will be structural change across every economy and social change. We know from our work that men do want to take parental leave. They do want to be with their families. They're exactly the same aspirations as women, but they feel that it's going to be a career killer. So it's through doing work where we can overcome that and give men confidence. It's not a career killer. Come back, you'll get a bonus if you come back. A lot of our organisations now give bonuses when people come back from parental leave. When we have men and women caring, you'll get far greater participation in the workforce. That's good for the economy. Having immigration is good for the economy. Having diversity across our cultures is very good. And it's the sort of rich, interesting life we want to have in our society and our workplaces.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank the panel enough for engaging us in such a challenging conversation. We have a gift that we'd like to present to you on your way down. Naomi will be there. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please thank Cathy McDermott, Leonie Freeman, Jason Walker and Ryan Johnson for the challenge that we've received today.